By the time they're doing the robbery, they will have already had their boarding passes.
Okay.
So when they're doing the robbery with the boarding passes in their pocket, they've
Yeah.
checked in already. I said, you stand up. Okay, sir. It was so funny. And you stand up. Okay, and they were actually dropping jewelry from their hands
Okay. Yeah.
onto the floor. But it didn't stop them, which in itself was rather strange. Where are these people coming from?
Yeah.
You know, we're picking them up, we're throwing them in prison, we're prosecuting them, we're getting convictions, but they're still coming.
Sean Houghton, Dangerous Person 2.0, English channel.
Welcome again to Dangerous Person 2.0, English channel. Today we're going to talk about a style of robberies which Filipinos like to engage in. Actually, a recent one has occurred in Turkey. But these robberies like to target jewelry stores, or even a jewelry fair is viable. Hong Kong, between 1978 and 82, we had a specific gang of Filipinos called the Flying Filipinos. And as usual, I have my guest that is familiar with all of you, Chief Inspector Nolan McKillop. How are you today, Nolan?
I'm fine, thank you.
All right, very good. So we have a somewhat sophisticated group of Filipinos who are coming in here and doing robberies. You basically, when was the first time you heard of this? How do you get involved, and what's the task force that you're part of when you do get involved?
At that time I was a Chief Inspector in Hong Kong Island Regional Crime Unit, RCU we call it. We were based in Mid-Levels Police Station, and our duties were to obviously deal with major crime in Hong Kong Island. The Flying Filipinos were probably one of the most interesting cases that I was ever involved in. Apart from homicides, this wasn't, thankfully, this wasn't a homicide. But it took up quite a lot of, well over a year of my life. Well, at that time we were on duty in Mid-Levels Police Station, and we got a call to say that there'd been a robbery in the Silver's jewelry shop in Central.
Yeah, this is right in Central.
Right in Central. Now, the Silver's jewelry shop is a well-known jewelry shop. It's quite an iconic place. Good quality jewelry. They'd been there for many years. It was right on the corner of the entrance into China Building, Pedder Street.
Yes.
So highly visible, well known. We got a call to say that there'd been an armed robbery in the jewelry shop. So the uniform branch, of course, would be first on the scene.
Okay, what time was this?
I think it was just on opening.
Okay, so this is broad daylight.
It's broad daylight, just on opening.
Okay.
So we rushed down there with my team, and the uniform branch were there. There'd be no press, because press listening to our radios and all kinds of things, and usually they're on the scene before we are. But we were lucky in this occasion, there was no press. Pedder Street was getting pretty crowded. So when we arrived in the scene, there were 3 staff inside. They were pretty shaken up, because they'd been tied up. They had gags put over their mouth, tape. They had the arms tied behind their backs. They'd managed to loosen themselves by the time they could call the police. But they were pretty shaken up. Anyway, we got the story from them, calmed them down, and it turned out that two men had entered with guns, threatened the people in the shop, turned down the blinds. The third man had entered. They turned down the blinds, which meant the door was shut, which meant they were invisible to the outside. They tied them up, gagged them, and ransacked the shop, put everything into a big brown bag, and off they went.
So they're in the middle of Central.
Yeah.
Where are they going? You're in Central. How are they getting out of Central?
Let's get on to that a
Okay,
bit
all right.
later. But so anyway, we interviewed these people at length, but apart from interviewing them, we also did forensics at the scene, but it was quite visible to us that there was a boarding pass left on the floor, which was clearly one of the robbers. We also found a wallet on the floor of the shop, which was dropped by one of the robbers. The boarding pass was a flight to Manila. We had a name with the flight, and the flight had departed by the time we got on the scene. The wallet had nothing of significance in it other than the name of a hotel in Central. So there were two clues for us. The other clue was that the description of the robbers they were clearly not Chinese. They spoke reasonably good English with an accent. The staff thought they were either Filipinos or Indonesians. Now, there was one other item found on the floor of the shop, which was an immigration departure card, Hong Kong style immigration departure card, but it was blank.
Okay.
So we carefully, with the scene of crime officers, we carefully bagged these items.
Okay.
Now, there was quite a large amount of jewelry stolen. So it was clear to us that the robbers were on their way to Kai Tak. Now, the Silver's jewelry shop was situated within a minute from the entrance to the MTR. On either side of the road there's an entrance, as you know. But they could enter the MTR without leaving China Building. And they could go straight to the airport. So we had limited manpower, but we put out requests for assistance to all the other departments that we could to check for ferries. We didn't strictly stick to the airport. We contacted the police at Kai Tak Airport to inform them with all the descriptions that we had, and to check for Filipinos boarding any flights. We checked all the flights leaving that night and the next day. So all these kinds of things that we had to do immediately. Right. So we couldn't do all that ourselves, so we got help from other departments and other units of the police. We checked that hotel. Nothing particularly significant that we could find there. So we were pretty busy that night, well into the night. When we had another breakthrough, we had an arrest at the airport of someone who was acting suspiciously, a Filipino gentleman.
Okay.
So we brought him in for questioning, and we kept him for 48 hours, which is our legal limit without charging a person. I personally interrogated him at length because he was an English speaker. He couldn't speak any Chinese. He was Filipino. And to cut that piece of the story a bit shorter, I turned him as an informer. He was clearly involved with the gang. We couldn't get any evidence against him personally, but he became my informer, in essence.
Okay.
So through him, that started the whole adventure for me, which brought me to the Philippines and the United States and other places in search of the people involved in this operation.
But so are you saying the robbers got away?
Yes.
They got away to the Manila or somewhere?
Yeah. There was an arrest in Manila late, because we did, of course, contact the police in the Philippines. There was an arrest later that night in Manila, but they let that person go because there was insufficient evidence to link him with a robbery in Hong Kong.
Okay.
Unfortunately, they let him go without even taking fingerprints or anything of that nature. So, anyway, we'll deal with that later. But to set the scene, this led to a spate of similar type robberies, which carried on for at least 1 year. Several robberies, mostly in Kowloon, some on Hong Kong Island, involving Filipinos who were armed, and they would go straight to the airport with or without the loot.
Okay, from the MTR.
Using the MTR.
Okay.
Now, over the next few months, I went to Manila to do investigations there with some help from the National Bureau of Investigation, which is the Philippines FBI. I went there on a mission to meet with the NBI, brief them on the case, try to get evidence, and several other trips there later. I went there to also liaise with the police, but also to liaise with my informer.
So your informer is back in the
in the Philippines.
Okay.
So I met with up with him several times, and eventually developed the modus operandi for this particular gang, which was pretty slick.
Okay. So what was it?
So the modus operandi was these people would arrive, ideally, this is according to the plan, the handler would arrive in Hong Kong first. The handler would identify target premises. And one of the criteria of that target premises was that it must be near an MTR. And the MTR with the direct line to Kai Tak Airport.
Okay.
So he would arrive in advance of the gang. He'd identified the premises.
Yeah.
The guns were already in Hong Kong.
Okay. How did they get the guns in?
The guns I found out later through, again, trips to Manila and liaison with the so-called informer. The guns were taken aboard the flights in Manila Airport by the cleaners. And the cleaners would put the guns in some receptacles behind the sink in the toilet.
Okay.
In the plane.
Okay.
Once the gang members were on board, as soon as the flight took off, they would go to the toilets and retrieve the guns. So they were on the airport, on the aircraft, armed. Now at that time, there was no metal detectors set up in Kai Tak Airport for incoming passengers.
Okay.
There were metal detectors for boarding passengers,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
But not for incoming. So it was a pretty good MO. So, but the guns will be taken, not usually by the actual robbers themselves. There should have been a cache of guns already set up by the handler, but in every case it was slightly different. The robbers would arrive, they'd be booked, checked into a 2-3-star hotel,
Okay.
typically.
Yeah.
By the time they're doing the robbery, they will have already had their boarding passes.
Okay.
So when they're doing the robbery with the boarding passes in their pocket, they've checked in already.
Oh. Okay.
Right. As soon as the robbery took place, in theory, they should be handing the jewelry to the handler,
Okay.
along with the guns. The handler would then put the jewelry and the guns in a safe deposit box, which he'd already set up nearby.
Okay.
So the robbers, in theory, should proceed to the airport, board the plane, and in theory be back in Manila probably before guys like me are at the scene.
It's a less than a 2-hour flight, 1.5 hour flight.
It's 1.5 hour flight, but the key is the journey to the airport is 20-30 minutes
Yeah.
at the most.
Yeah. Yes. 20 minutes.
So within an hour of the robbery, they could be boarding the flight. Don't forget they have the boarding passes on them. The other key issue was they all had, and again this took months to develop with the informer in the Philippines. They had, let's say, false passports, but actually the passport itself was not false. The names were not true names. The underlying documents to obtain the passports, like birth certificates, school certificates in the Philippines sometimes is required, addresses, proof of address, they were all false. So the passport facilitator who I met, and there's many of them surrounding the area of where the passports are applied for, fixers who could fix these things, which is quite common in the Philippines. Not only for passports, but for other things.
Okay. So you're using false information to get a valid passport.
Valid passport.
Okay.
So the immigration department here or even Manila would not be able to detect the false passport because the passport's not false. It's the underlying documentation which is false.
Okay.
So let's call it a false passport. So these people would come and do robberies more than once under different names.
On valid passports.
On valid passports.
okay.
Different identities.
So the picture will come off one, put on another, and they come back in for another robbery.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So, so over the next year, there was a number of these robberies, all armed and pretty serious. Luckily, there was no murder. No one was killed. In fact, there was, I don't believe a shot was actually fired during the series of the robberies. in my situation, what did I do? I think I've already explained that over the next few months, I went back and forward to Manila. But I put together a memo after a few days, after the initial questioning of the informer, the person we arrested and then let go. It was very clear to me that this was a particularly dangerous MO for Hong Kong, and it is probably not the last case we'd see. There's probably more coming, because a lot of work had gone into the planning for this particular case. So I put together an intelligence report,
Okay.
which was sent to police headquarters, and within a few days I was taken out of Regional Crime Unit and taken into Organised and Serious Crime Bureau to handle this case and handle the informer. So that's how I came to going back and forward to Manila on my own, which on reflection was pretty foolhardy, and I'm quite surprised that I was actually allowed to do this. But anyway, I was. And after realizing that the series of cases was beginning, there was a case in Kowloon with exactly the same MO. I put that together, what we call an operational order. An operational order is what it says, it's an order. So the order, it was quite a basic order, but it was based on the premise that speed was of the essence, because typically when there's a robbery of this nature, the first on the scene are the uniform branch. And then the CID would get there, maybe depending. It depends on which CID unit is involved. So we had decided at police headquarters and Organised Crime Bureau that we wouldn't handle all these cases, because to get us guys out of police headquarters and get to a scene of a crime in Kowloon takes some time. There has to be a decision by the regional commanders to contact the police headquarters, who would then direct the criminal investigation, director of criminal investigation, to direct us to take over the case, and that takes time. Yeah, it's a bit cumbersome. By that time, they're back in Manila.
Yeah.
So I was tasked with kind of overseeing, not interfering, but kind of overseeing these cases and gathering intelligence and coming up with a way to stop them.
So this is why they're called the Flying Filipinos, because they
I call them
fast.
that.
Oh, you gave them the nickname.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay.
So anyway, I put together an operational order called Lambcross, and it is an order. Lambcross was sent out by police headquarters to all districts with instructions that, with a briefing, the type of case involving foreign nationals, possibly Filipinos, but not exclusive. Foreign nationals in robbery of jewelry shops. We explained that the time is of the essence, because it's quite likely that these people would head directly to Kai Tak Airport and board a flight.
Yeah.
Probably, but not exclusively, to the Philippines.
Okay.
Now, the instruction was that the people on the ground at the scene of crime were to gather the witnesses together, get those who were volunteering and willing to go directly to the airport. And prior to proceeding to the airport, they had telephone numbers and detailed instructions. They had to call a number at Kai Tak Airport, and Kai Tak Airport police had already this order in their possession. Would call Kai Tak Airport, who would arrange special passes for these witnesses to be taken to the finger. Not just to immigration, but behind immigration.
Okay. The finger is where the planes come
in
to the gates.
The passengers actually board.
Okay. It's like 5 gates for 5. That's why it's called the fingers.
Yes, we call them fingers.
Okay.
So it'd actually be taken to the finger of any Manila or bound aircraft, particularly Manila.
Yeah.
That was about to leave. If passengers had boarded that plane already, they would go aboard the plane.
Okay.
With a view to identifying the robbers.
Okay. So part of your order is to hold that plane, so these guys can do that.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
if it hadn't already departed. We would hold the plane.
Okay.
So it involved civil aviation. It involved the special duties unit at the airport. These are the armed police that you see at the airport. It involved the different districts, particularly Kowloon and Hong Kong Island, where these jewelry shops were being robbed. So it was a quick response. It had to be quick. So Operation Lambcross was implemented within about 2 months after the first robbery.
Okay.
And once we had firmly decided on the particular modus operandi that these people were employing, it didn't stop the robberies, but it led to a lot of arrests.
Okay.
Over the next year, there was a number of arrests, court cases, prosecutions, seizure of firearms, seizure of jewelry. In one particular case, I think it was on a Sunday again, I would be informed immediately of all these cases, so I could monitor and make sure that Operation Lambcross was being implemented properly, and also gather intelligence so we could cross-reference. In one particular case, there was a flight came up from Sydney, 747 Qantas, and it was picking up passengers and dropping off a few in Hong Kong. And then its next stop was Manila, and then it was proceeding off to the UK. So that was the target airplane. So I went along quickly. I managed to get there quickly with one of my officers, and the Kowloon police were already onto it. And they'd already made several arrests. And it was to me, quite amusing because they were pulling the luggage out. The plane had been detained. So I went aboard the aircraft and went into the cockpit to speak to the pilots. And I said to the pilot, can you make an announcement in a way that's not going to alarm your passengers, but just explain to them that the police are going to come in. And you could see from the windows, Filipinos already arrested and Kowloon police taking their luggage off the plane from the hold.
Yeah.
So the operation was still underway, but there was no one looking after the inside of the plane. So I went with one of my officers, and they made the announcement saying some police officers are here. There's been an incident in Hong Kong, and they're just looking for some passengers here, possibly on the plane. So I walked down the aisle, and I saw some Filipinos with their faces. Instinctively, I knew. And it was quite funny. I think of it to this day. I said, "You stand up." "Okay, sir." It was so funny. And you stand up. "Okay." And they were actually dropping jewelry from their hands onto the floor. It was really funny. Not funny at the time, but think about it now, it's a bit funny. They didn't, no violence, nothing, surrendered immediately. So we got the Kowloon police to come and take them, arrest them, and gather up the jewelry that they'd dropped, tried to hide in the pockets and up above, and then let them get on with it. And we went back to police headquarters, let them get on with their job. They were doing a fine job. And so we had several cases.
One thing just jumps out here.
Yeah.
These guys have jewelry on them. They're supposed to turn it over.
That's why previously I said, in theory.
Okay, all right, yeah, okay.
In theory, they should have handed that jewelry onto the handler before they went to Kai Tak. That didn't always happen.
Okay, so they didn't stick to the plan.
No.
Okay.
They've got pockets full of jewelry. Come on, they're robbers.
Yeah.
They want to keep the loot for themselves. They don't trust
the handler.
The handler.
Okay.
Kowloon Police actually did a very good job. Different units within Kowloon Police over the next year. In some cases, they actually arrested and found its safety deposit boxes with guns, which corroborated the story from the informer that the guns would theoretically be already in Hong Kong.
So your target's always there, the weapons are already there.
Yeah.
You're supposed to go and get set up, do the job. As on the way out, you return the guns, you drop off the jewelry.
Yeah.
And someone breaks from the plan, and you have an informant.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, there were several other cases. Operation Lambcross worked very well, but it didn't stop them, which in itself was rather strange. Where are these people coming from?
Yeah.
You know, we're picking them up, we're throwing them in prison, we're prosecuting them, we're getting convictions, but they're still coming.
So there's a unlimited manpower.
It seemed that way.
Okay.
And guns were still coming into Hong Kong, obviously, because all of these cases were armed with guns, typically with guns. Some copycat later, after all this had been subdued, there was a few copycat cases later on with knives. Not the same sophisticated gang, but there was a few who thought, oh, I want to make some money like this. But they didn't have the guns, but they had knives. Anyway, about a year later, I think, again, it was a Saturday. I got a call in the office from Kai Tak Place to say that a Filipino had been arrested by customs coming through with a firearm. He had a 38. Now, 38s were the typical firearms that they had. They're pretty common in Philippines. The mainland robbers would not have 38s. They would have Chinese weapons or even AK-47s in some case. But so anyway, he'd been picked up. Now, another very important aspect that I'd learned through trips to Manila was, and this was from the informer and the passport fixer, they usually didn't fix the passports for one, they fixed it for 4 or 5 or 6. And they issued the passports all with consecutive numbers.
Okay.
Which is a real telltale. Oh,
okay. Yeah.
These are, I call them false, but they're not false. This is the gang.
Yeah.
So I got the call about the Filipino arrested with the weapon. So we did a check on the aircraft that he'd come in, and we found 5 other Filipinos with consecutive numbers to his passport. So we knew the gang was here.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, we had to find, we knew they're here to do a robbery. They're not here to go to the cathedral and pray. They were coming to do a robbery.
Yes.
So, and they were bringing guns in. This one had been caught. Now, typically, as we found out later, they would bring the guns in, and in these days, the customs counter, they had 4 or 5 counters. So passengers coming into the customs hall to go through customs, they could go to this customs officer or that one or this one. And the gang, they could all have been carrying firearms, but they'd split up. So if one was caught, the likelihood is the others would get out.
Yeah.
Because all the focus would be
Immediately onto
that
the
guy,
one.
yeah, and the others would just go through customs.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happened. So I put a small team together. Okay, let's have a snoop around Kowloon, around the 2nd, 3rd star, 3-star hotels where they would typically stay. So we did a few hotels, couldn't find anything. Eventually, we turned up at the Astor Hotel. I think it was, I'm not remember which street it was, but it was in the heart of Chim Sa Choy in the busy area, just off Nathan Road.
Okay.
And at the front desk, we found that the Filipino had checked in that day, that morning,
Okay.
an hour after the arrest of or so. But we spoke to the manager, and I said, only one had checked in, but there was 4 or 5 people in one room. So we checked the passports, and sure enough, they were all simultaneous numbers. So we knew this was the gang. We had 4 of us, myself and my sergeant and 2 constables, detective constables. So we got the manager to give us a room adjacent to where, just next door to where the Filipinos were.
Okay. Did you have a connecting door?
No.
Okay.
One had checked in, but we knew there was 5 of them in there.
Yeah.
Right? And we thought, oh, we better get some reinforcements, of course, because we knew these people were armed. So I didn't want to call emergency unit because I didn't want blue lights and flashing lights, because they could have, there was only a few of us and there were more than us, and they could have stormed out if they were alerted. And one of my greatest priorities is not to allow these people to get on the streets.
Yeah.
Because it's Chim Sa Choy on a Saturday. It was packed full of tourists, and it had been a mayhem.
Yeah.
If they'd been allowed to get out of that
They'll
room.
easily blend into the crowd and disappear.
Well, not only that, if there was a gunfight,
Oh, even worse.
that's a disaster. So I called my team in headquarters, asked them to get over here as soon as possible, as quickly as possible, right? And we would try and hold the situation ourselves. And I think about 20 minutes after I'd made that call for reinforcements, someone came out of the room. So we grabbed him and pulled him into our room.
Okay.
He turned out to be the handler.
Oh, okay.
He was the colonel in the military and the prisons department, which was part of the military. Tell you a bit more about him later. So we grabbed him.
Yeah.
And we knew that they were just about then to go and do the robbery, because he was going to get outside and be there to, in theory, take the jewelry and the guns after the robbery and put them in the safe deposit box. So we grabbed him, and we waited and waited and waited, really getting a bit worried at this stage, because we had one prisoner. There was only 4 of us. So if something happened, someone would have to stay with the prisoner.
Yeah.
Right. So we were getting a bit thin on the ground. So, and there was no sign of my team. Don't forget, in these days, we didn't have mobile phones, iPhones.
Yeah.
We had no internet. We had pagers, which were useless in that situation. And we waited and waited and waited. I think 45 minutes, still no one turned up. So we knew they were about to go and do a robbery, because the handler was positioning himself.
Yeah.
So one of my guys was told to stay with the handler. He was handcuffed. And then we decided we need to do something. We can't let them out. If they get out, it'd be a disaster. So we decided to go in.
Okay, there's at least 4 or 5 in there?
Yeah, at least 4.
At least 4.
At least 4.
And you're 3 going in?
We have 3, 1 looking after the prisoner.
So 2 are going in?
Yes. Now, one of my guys, Lone Wajai, curly hair boy, he was kind of tall, and he was the best shot. And we knew it was a very small room. I wasn't armed. So that left, I said, look, only one of you draw your firearm. Because in a very small place, we just wanted one firearm ready. So we got the manager again and said, we want the master key to go in the room. And so he gave us the master key, and then he ran away. If I was him, I'd do the same. So we decided to go in, but we approached the door, but they saw us somehow.
A shadow underneath
the door, and there was a scuffling inside the room.
Okay.
So we just went straight inside. The room was black, completely. The blinds were pulled down. It was a very small room. It was a single room. It was just one bed, a small hotel. One bed, a shower, toilet, and that was it. I think there were 4 of them in there.
Okay.
They scattered. Jesus Avendano, who I later knew his name, big guy, he headed for the toilet, and he had a gun. And my sergeant had grabbed him, but he was getting pulled along.
Because he's a big Filipino.
He was a big guy. The others were scattering all over the place. But the Lone Wajai was shouted, get down. And I'd given instructions to the team that you need to disarm them by whatever means necessary. If they don't do exactly as they're told, but use whatever means. If it's violence, use violence. It doesn't matter. We're not concerned. They're violent robbers with firearms. So, and Lone Wajai was instructed to look after us. If anyone points a firearm at us, he was to shoot them.
Okay.
Simple as that. There was no middle ground, nothing. So fortunately, they surrendered pretty quickly, put the hands up.
What about this Jesus who's dragging your sergeant into the bathroom?
Is that how to pronounce it? Not Jesus, it's Jesus. He stopped mid-track because they all spoke English, so we shouted that we were going to open fire if they don't stop. And get on the ground. If you don't get on the ground immediately, we'll open fire. And they did. They got down on the ground with their hands. We handcuffed them.
Okay.
And anyway, we arrested them all. Meanwhile, after we'd made all the arrests, my stupid inspector arrived with the posse to back us up. It's too late.
Okay, so, but one second here. You're telling me about Jesus going into the trying to get into the bathroom, dragging the sergeant along, and a kicking incident occurred.
Yeah, I tried to kick him, but I missed him, kicked my sergeant.
Okay.
So I ended up limping for about a year, actually.
You pulled your tendons.
Pulled the tendons, anyway.
Mm-hmm.
When my inspector arrived, I was furious. Why it took so long.
Yeah, where was he?
It was a rest day. Instead of the MTR at police headquarters, just a few minutes run from the MTR entrance from police headquarters. Instead of taking the MTR, which would have brought him in minutes from there to us, right, he took cars. It was a rest day.
Wow.
And the fool, instead of, he should have known it was a rest day.
Yeah.
The tunnel's backed up.
Yeah.
He came by car, which was totally unnecessary. He didn't think outside the box. And perhaps I should have told him to take the MTR. But I thought he would have the sense not to take the cars to Kowloon on the rest day.
Yeah, so just for those who don't know, on the weekend, Hong Kong has a tradition of having horse racing at the jockey clubs. So
Yes.
everyone should know
Yeah.
getting about's going to be a problem. All right, so he arrives too late.
Yeah, anyway, too late, better late than never. So we've got plenty of reinforcements, we've got forensics, and we've got all sorts of stuff. And we round up the scene. We had 4 firearms, 38 specials, all loaded with 38 special ammunition.
Ammunition, yeah.
Not the rubbish that we had. It was extra charged, very powerful. They had, apart from the guns, they had knives too. They had wire to tie up people in the shop. They had the masking the tape to put over their mouths and possibly their eyes. But they also had glasses of a pink liquid.
Okay.
Big tumblers full, big glasses of pink liquid that some of them we knew had drunk, because some were full, some were half full. And the chemists later told us that this liquid was Red Label Scotch whiskey, which is not the best Scotch whiskey, but it was laced with Valium.
Oh.
So they'd been taking Red Label Scotch whiskey laced with Valium. It was a pink liquid laced with some other liquid which contained Valium. We found out later this was to calm them down.
I see.
Yeah, so they wouldn't be nervous during the robbery.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. To give them courage and to keep them calm at the same time?
Well, I like Scotch whiskey. I've never known it to give me courage. But if that's what was their intention, they picked not the best Scotch whiskey, which is okay, never mind. But the Valium was the main ingredient to calm them down.
Okay.
Scotch perhaps make them a bit not so afraid. I don't know. Anyway, they were all prepared for the robbery. So we took them back to police headquarters, called out our Filipino interpreters. In Hong Kong, we have a list of interpreters for different languages. It's provided by the High Court.
Yes.
Because they're qualified for the High Court, most of them. So we had a list of interpreters, and we called out our interpreters to do, because although they spoke good English, it's not their native language, so we needed Filipino interpreters to be present.
Yes.
And one of the interpreters recognized the handler as a person that she knew from a previous trial in Hong Kong in the High Court, who had been acquitted from the robbery charge. Part of another case the Kowloon teams had handled. And he'd been charged, but he'd been acquitted in the High Court case. Now, the judge, just by coincidence, my life is full of coincidences, just by coincidence, the judge in that High Court case was the father of the stupid inspector who'd taken the cars instead of the MTR. So just a coincidence. I'm not suggesting for a moment the judge was stupid. He was actually an extremely well-respected judge, and the acquittal was nothing to do with him. But it's just a coincidence. I thought a little aside there. But anyway, I mentioned that to this young inspector. So we interrogated them. We had them we had all the evidence we wanted against them. Charged them with attempted robbery or conspiracy to rob. We found out that, of course, the jewelry shop that they intended to rob. We we also found the bank where the safety deposit box was. Of course, there was no guns in it. We had all the guns.
Yeah.
And there was no jewelry because
you hadn't done the
there
job.
was no robbery.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was good evidence against the handler.
Mm-hmm.
As I said, we identified him. Of course, he was on a false name. We eventually identified him through fingerprints as being a colonel in the U.S. military.
Mm-hmm. In the Filipino.
In the Philippines. And as I said, we also identified a particular MO that this gang used, highly organized by Philippine military and certain police and prisons officers. They were actually taking prisoners out of Tondo prison, using them as fodder to come and do robberies with the promise that they would get part of the loot eventually, and they'd also be let out of prison. But they had to go back to the prison after they'd done the robbery.
Well, that's very smart because your suspects are now in prison.
Yes, it's quite an amazing MO.
Yeah.
Something I never came across, and
Yeah.
it's stranger than fiction.
Fantastic. And this is the source of the unlimited manpower.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah.
So over a year, I think there was probably about 8 very serious robberies. Lambcross helped with arrests in virtually all of these robberies.
Okay, you shine the light on the modus operandi.
They still kept going. Kept coming to Hong Kong. No matter what, we made arrests, and some of them, like this handler, came back again
Yeah.
for a second bite at the cherry before he was caught. Well, we'd been searching for this handler for almost a year because we knew he was key. Without the handler, it would be difficult for this operation to continue because, of course, we'd be on the alert for guns on the way into Hong Kong.
Yeah.
So without the handler, there wouldn't be a cache of guns already here.
Yeah.
So when we caught the handler, and after we'd dealt with them all at trial, they were all convicted. These cases fell off. There were some copycat cases later on, as I said, with knives, etc. But we put an end effectively to the Flying Filipinos.
Okay. So now, many trips to Manila.
Yes.
Anywhere else?
Oh, yes. The immigration card found on the floor at De Silva's. We got information that one of the robbers had escaped to the United States. Now, we found a fingerprint on that piece of paper. So we did searches, but what we call an FBI officer in Hong Kong, he's called the legal liaison officer. He's actually the FBI officer.
Okay.
And he was a good friend of mine, still is to this day.
Okay.
So I asked him if he would do a search in the United States. It's not that easy in the United States to do a nationwide search where there's hundreds and hundreds of police forces. And the FBI is not that big, it's actually quite a small. Hong Kong police were, at that time, including the Marine Police, which is not separate, was about 30,000 strong. I believe the FBI in these days was about 12,000 strong.
Okay.
So he initiated that search, and 2 years later, he gave me a call and said they found him.
Okay.
His name was Esteban.
Esteban is the
Esteban.
Filipino.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So he was identified. He was married. He was in Los Angeles. His wife was a nurse. So steps that we have to take there is to send out an arrest warrant. Now, once we agreed to execute an arrest warrant, we have 45 days to complete the extradition process, which is a paper process. And there's very strict rules. So if we can't do it in 45 days, it's gone. We've lost it.
Do you get another bite at the apple?
No.
That's it.
That's
Okay.
it. So we put all the papers together ahead of requesting the warrant of arrest to be executed.
Okay. This will be an Interpol.
Interpol would Interpol would submit the papers on our behalf.
Okay.
But through our legal department, we would do the extradition papers. Once we've got them perfect, we would ask the Americans to execute the warrant. Once they'd said that they actually executed and made the arrest, we would then send the extradition papers through the Justice Department to our legal department, to their Justice Department. Then we have 45 days.
Okay.
Right.
So now you've located him in America. Your FBI friends located him.
Yeah.
Does he get arrested?
Yes, he's arrested. So they inform us that he's arrested. He's in custody. So we then send the pre-prepared extradition papers.
Okay.
Once the judge decides that he can be extradited, then we have to be there to take him back.
Okay.
So myself and one of my officers went to the States once we'd been notified by the FBI that he's ready to come back. So when we arrived, they asked us to wait. So we found a hotel in Santa Monica and we stayed there for 2 weeks. It was a beautiful holiday. So,
But you only have 45 days.
yes.
Okay. You still have time.
No, he's been arrested.
Yeah.
The judge has decided he's to be extradited.
Okay.
So.
Oh, he's already decided on the
Yes.
paperwork.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we don't know. The FBI said just go there and wait. We'll call you when we're ready.
Okay. All right. So you're on 2-week vacation.
2 weeks later, it was about 4 o'clock in the morning. They called me and said, "Come to the airport immediately." So I got to LA. The two of us got to LA airport within a couple of hours, and from Santa Monica, and FBI officer was there with the prisoner, and he said, "Okay, he's yours." I said, "Well, we have to get to Seattle. We're flying from Seattle. Will you come with us?" He said, "No." I said, "Well, we have no jurisdiction. Do you want them or not?" "Of course we want them, but we can't arrest them. We can't handcuff them. We can't force them to." This is all out of earshot of the prisoner.
Yeah,
But
sure.
he said, "Well, you take them or you don't take them. It's up to you. But I'm not going to Seattle." So, so I said, "Okay, but can you arrange someone to meet us in Seattle?" "Sure," he said. He said, "Here's, take my handcuffs." Of course, the prisoner Esteban doesn't know that we have no jurisdiction.
Yeah.
So he came with us to Seattle. But he was always asking, he knew he was going back to Hong Kong, but he wanted to speak to his wife. Of course, there's no phone calls. And the FBI officer explained to us why he called us very early in the morning to come immediately to the airport. He explained that this is typical in an extradition case because they don't want the prisoner to have a chance to call a lawyer to serve a writ of habeas corpus, which means they bring up the body to the court. So it would
process.
Delay everything, and then we start again. So their method to avoid that is to grab the prisoner while he's still groggy at 4 in the morning, take him straight to the airport where whoever's going to take him out of the country is there already to whisk him out before there's any more legal. So there's no way I was going to let him have a phone call. But at Seattle Airport, about 5 minutes before departure or loading time, boarding time, I let him call his wife. And he was in tears, saying bye-bye to his wife. But I was listening, of course. And he boarded the plane. And I wanted to keep things low-key. I didn't want it was a US airline. I didn't want them to really know he was a prisoner. But somehow they knew. Because I asked if Esteban could have a beer. I wanted to have a few San Miguel so he would speak to me on the journey back. But the hostess wouldn't allow it. He's a prisoner.
Okay.
I said, "Well, can I have one?" I said, "No, you can't because you're in charge of the prisoners." So anyway, on the way back, he opened up and he told us the whole story about the robbery. And as soon as we arrived in Hong Kong, we arrested him. And he joined his fellow robbers in Stanley Prison not long after that. But I would go to Stanley Prison occasionally on some other business and see them playing basketball, and they would always say, "Hello, Mr. McCaleb, how are you?"
Yeah.
So, but that was virtually the end of the Flying Filipinos. But what an adventure! Just one other thing. The informer told us that they were planning on doing a robbery in Singapore, which again was ideal. So I went over to Singapore to liaise with the Singapore police and gave them Operation Lambcross and said, this is how we deal with it. And while I was in Singapore, they did a robbery in Hong Kong. I'm not sure this informer was not pulling my leg, but while I was in Singapore, they robbed another jewelry shop in Hong Kong. But we also informed the Tokyo police because Tokyo is ideal for that too. So we informed other police forces with similar setups with good mass transit to the airport, etc. So, but anyway, that was the end of the Flying Filipinos. But, at the end of a big adventure, no murder involved.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I understand they've applied this new scheme to Bangkok over the last couple of years. And they did one in Turkey.
Have they?
Yeah.
Oh,
but that was at a Turkish fair, jewel fair.
Really?
It makes the immediate run to the airport.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and they did one in
Filipinos?
Bangkok. Yeah, Filipinos.
Oh, they're still up with it.
Yeah.
Good.
So the Bangkok one flew into Manila, and they were arrested when they landed.
But no one killed, no one...
No one killed. No
No.
one killed. So, but getting your recruits from prison, committing the crime, putting them back into prison, it's actually kind of genius.
Yes.
Because you're looking for someone outside of prison to charge.
Only in Manila.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think that would happen in many other jurisdictions.
Because they won't get out of the prison.
No.
You won't have a colonel letting them out.
I probably wouldn't be possible nowadays. Oh, you're saying that they're still on the go in Turkey and elsewhere?
Yeah, I don't know if it's connected to a prison. And
These are Filipinos.
These are Filipinos.
Flying Filipinos.
They're trying to be.
Looks like it.
The MTR system. They're trying to be. Immediately rushing to the airport and then getting out. So some elements.
With their boarding pass already on them when they're...
I don't know. But
maybe it's the sons of the Jesus Avendano and other people and
Jesus.
Esteban.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so did you ever see Jesus again?
Jesus?
Yeah, after you locked him up?
I saw him several times on my visits to Stanley, as I said, in other business.
Okay.
He would be playing basketball with the other Filipinos.
Okay, doing well.
Having a good time. And,
right. Okay, very good. So there was also an incident in court regarding your kicking.
Oh, my kicking.
Yeah, with the defense
yes, they did.
had some questions for you.
They did. When I was giving evidence, the defense cross-examined me and accused me of kicking the clients one by one.
Yeah.
It's defense counsel questioning me one by one, not me kicking one by one.
Yeah.
And the first one accused me of kicking his client was Jesus Avendano. And I said, yes, I kicked him. And he was pretty shocked when I admitted kicking him. I said, not only did I kick him once, I kicked him probably 4 or 5 times. I said, why did you kick him? Because he didn't immediately surrender.
Yeah.
I said, they had guns, and if they didn't surrender, we could have opened fire.
So how's the judge taking this?
The judge was pretty furious after this questioning continued along these lines, and he shut them down, and he reminded them that they were all armed with firearms, possibly drugged up. That was the evidence, and the officer had admitted kicking, which in his view was not an
use of force.
Overuse of force, given that they were armed.
Yes.
And they were, at least 2 of the policemen were armed, and they could quite legitimately have opened fire. He shut them down very quickly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Actually, be grateful for a kick instead of a bullet.
I think they were.
Okay.
But as soon as they were subdued, and they surrendered pretty quickly. Seemed a long time, but it was actually seconds before they surrendered. There was of course, no further violence.
Okay, excellent.
And they were grateful for that, because if they'd been arrested in the Philippines, they would probably have been shot.
Sure.
The case was heard in the High Court by Acting Judge Bansi. The judge sentenced the first defendant, 43-year-old Mario Yance, the second defendant, 39-year-old Daniel Lully, and the third defendant, 33-year-old Franz Bashar, to 6 years in prison, while the fourth defendant, 32-year-old Roger Lunaba, was sentenced to 7 years in prison. In delivering the sentence, the judge pointed out that due to the recent increase in jewelry and gold thefts, strict penalties must be enforced. The judge also stated that this was a planned robbery and that the defendants should have received a 9-year sentence. However, considering they were exploited by others and pleaded guilty in court, the sentences were reduced accordingly.
All right. Well, thanks again, Norman,
Okay.
for all your help here. First-hand experience. Great stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you liked, comment, share, subscribe, and share. I said that. Okay. Thanks. Cheers. Take care.